no Victocrats allowed. Why? Because we've got a country to save. Join me, Larry Elder, tonight starting at 7 on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. What to do with respect to Syria and the chemical attack? What's the latest total and the dead and the injured? I mean, it's in the hundreds. I know dead, which the last I heard was 42.
42, yeah.
Right, hundreds
women and
more
children.
injured.
But yesterday, but Trump tweeted, it's not, the decision hadn't been made when Trump tweeted that missiles will be coming. And it sounds like it's not if, but when an airstrike will happen here, Sarah Sanders.
We're maintaining that we have a number of options, and all of those options are still on the table.
The president says, get ready, Russia, they will be coming. The missiles are coming. How is that anything but an announcement of a pending airstrike?
Certainly one option, but that doesn't mean it's the only option or the only thing that the president may or may not do.
Yeah, I know. The argument that's been made that could be misdirection play on behalf of the president, subterfuge, and so on and so forth. I think it was a silly tweet.
Oh, gosh.
It did not rise to the occasion of events on the ground. But in addition to that, the question of chemical weapons and understanding that chemical weapons differ than conventional wisdom on this topic insofar as precedent setting. And so even if a conventional attack on his own people had been orchestrated by Assad and the body count was higher, would we be responding the same way? Well, maybe not, but that's because chemical weapons are a different category, and there's a message to be sent to rogue operators the world over about the use of chemical weapons, not to mention potentially a message to be sent about using chemical weapons on your own people. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, former U.S. Navy lieutenant, I should mention, in addition to being a medical doctor, and he's lieutenant commander in the Navy. And he's also the author of the book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Dr. Jasser, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So what do you think the appropriate response should be to this chemical attack?
Well, I think the president last year set the standard. He made the red line clear, and though it was symbolic, I think now it has to be much more than that, in that we've seen a slow normalization, believe it or not, of the use of weapons of mass destruction, with possibly the Russians' use in the UK through that assassination. We've seen Kim Jong-un likely use it in the assassination of his family member. So there had been talk that Russia had guaranteed that the chemical weapons would not be used. Obama had basically said that was one of the achievements of his administration, was the removal of chemical weapons. And yet we know that there have been 20 or 30 attacks using chemical weapons, some of them by ISIS, but most of them have been by the regime. Why do we know that? Because the regime in Syria is the only one with the mechanism of delivery for chemical weapons, with the aircraft, gunships, etc., that would be necessary to deliver that. So Macron said today from France that he basically is convinced that there's proof that it was done. And I think the United States, when they look at their interests, when you see chemical weapons of mass destruction being used 40 miles from the Israeli border with an ally of Iran, an ally of Hezbollah, and there's a video that some of us in the Syrian activist community have seen with an Iranian IRGC general basically a few days before the attack laughing about the gassing of children and babies and women in that area. So there's a lot of evidence here, and I think there needs to be a message sent that just cannot happen in today's world.
Well, the Syrians, one argument that I heard is that this is staged, that the video that we're seeing is, that they put actors in a room, and that's what this is, that they are not responsible for that. Have you heard a similar argument?
Yeah, that just not only does that not make any sense, these false flag conspiracy theories, it always is amazing to me that every chemical attack we see, somehow the opposition always managed to gas itself. It would be bizarre for the opposition, which had its last stronghold in Duma, would then deploy gas attacks against itself, rather than ever seeing video footage of gas attacks against Syrian military, against neighborhoods that there's Alawites or military regime personnel. So it always is amazing to me that they seem to know how to deploy it against themselves at periods in which, by the way, the timing makes sense. People say, why would they deploy it after President Trump said he was leaving? Well, that's actually why they deployed it, because they thought the threat was gone and they could now do sort of a final solution in Duma and wherever the rebels were left. There was President Trump said they were going to leave, and he had long said he did not want to deploy forces anywhere, let alone in Syria. So they thought that this was following through with his campaign promises, and they just went ahead and did it. So I think they're a bit surprised at the hawkish response of President Trump, and I think he's doing what's right and realizing that the weight of the leadership of the free world and the presence in the White House changes a lot of the campaign rhetoric that gets thrown around sometimes about America not being the world's policeman.
Is there any doubt in your mind that this chemical attack in Duma was at the behest of Assad?
Again, because of delivery issues, because of a number of evidence. We have family in the area in Damascus and Aleppo. These areas are clearly areas in which they're trying to stop any encroachment of the rebellion upon Damascus. Number two, I want people to realize from a humanitarian perspective and from a war perspective, this attack is not about one attack. There have been the deployment and use of chemical weapons over 20 times by the regime, and there have been over 600,000 killed, 10 million displaced, barrel bombs used. Hospitals are being targeted on a weekly basis. We know Syrian doctors that are unable to go to hospitals because the hospitals become targets. The hospitals are being built underground. So this is not a regime that you can ever feel sorry for. They don't follow any war conventions, and they deserve to be punished beyond this simple one attack because of the method of conflict that's being used inside Syria.
One of the arguments against further intervention is, look, a U.S. missile strike, even if you can see the point that the Assad regime is responsible, all the things that you just said in description of that regime. But another U.S. missile strike is not going to improve the lives of any Syrians. So what is the point of that? It just ends up being saber-rattling as an argument.
I would agree with that comment, in that if the response is going to be another simple one runway attack or even just 5 or 6, this has to be a forceful, crippling attack. And people will then say, well, then what are we left with? You're left with chaos. Syria cannot get worse.
Well, but wait, just right there, sorry to interrupt, but when you say it has to be a crippling attack, what does that look like? What would that require?
That looks like a decimation of the Air Force, runways, capabilities, gunships, destruction of as many jets as possible, to basically make it almost impossible, if not far more difficult for them to deploy any of the types of bombing operations, not only chemical weapons, but air campaigns that they've been doing against populations. So ultimately, it needs to be moving towards destroying the Assad regime capabilities. Now, does that mean we leave them with a vacuum? Syria can't get worse. America had to get rid of ISIS. Assad, Russia, and Iran created ISIS by radicalizing the Syrian population with the methods they use. So for those who say, well, we don't know what comes next, all I can say is we'll deal with the threats that come next, but now we have to realize that the worst thing for humanity has been proven to be the presence of the Assad regime. And I would even be in favor of targeting the president's palace and making sure that his regime is on the last few months of its existence.
All right, so that's what you think we should target? Because last time we had 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles pretty much strike an empty airfield in Syria, and I don't know if that was effective. But do you think this time we should strike where he lives?
Absolutely. And you're right. Not only was it not effective, it probably empowered the use of at least 3 other confirmed by the UN committees confirmed use of chemical weapons, and that they said, that's a joke. We had 90 minutes to hide. We knew it was coming. That can't happen again. And in some ways, this attack has been calibrated, but sometimes actually that's not as bad as you think, because we're getting the coalition together. The Brits and France are going to be involved in this. So I think we need to start looking at a Bosnian template in Syria, where we had a UN protection force in the area with no-fly zones, and President Clinton ultimately ended up ending the Milosevic regime and what Serbia was doing. And there are templates in the 90s that we used to end a civil war that was causing massive destruction and war crimes. So it's not rocket science to do things effectively even in the absence of Russian support, as we did in the Balkans.
I wanted to ask you about this documentary because you have family there and your knowledge of the region, and just want to, if you've seen it, get your take on it. The Last Men in Aleppo, about the white helmets. If you're familiar with it, I'm sure you're familiar with the white helmets, but if you're familiar with the film, if that was sort of an accurate portrayal of life on the ground in Syria and the dynamics that are in play to try to end the persecution of the Syrian people at the hands of Assad.
Yeah, I heard there was a state representative in Virginia 2 days ago on his Facebook page, Black, who said that the white helmets were actually Al-Qaeda operatives and other complete propaganda from the Assadist machine. The white helmets are doing God's work, and they are a non-affiliated group that has been going into areas where no one else would go into, and some of them would not come back out. Mm-hmm. Are some of them end up working near radicals? That's true. Are all of them great human beings? We don't know. But all we know is that I have family in Aleppo, and I can tell you that some of the only people they see as angels coming to help them are the white helmets who will go into buildings on the verge of falling apart to bring babies and others out of the rubble.
He is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and former U.S. Navy lieutenant commander, author of the book A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Dr. Jasser, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning